this debate is, well, it shows you in black and white. The news poll today has more than 70% of people suggest that reopening halfway through next year is the timeline. It's hard to see the Prime Minister being bold on this before an election.
You mean being bowled over, or is he being bold? He's not being bold, but but you're right. He's going to make sure he's not bowled clean by this. Look, I think he's.
Well, he's seen the states, hasn't he? McGowan, Palaszczuk.
Precisely. There's been 5. We've discussed this before. There's now been 5 elections in the COVID era in Australia. You know, the 2 territories and 3 states, and in each case, the incumbents have been returned. So that's been the lesson for politicians right through this crisis, is that if you stand strong on the health measures, if you put protecting people first, it plays well with voters. I heard Peter Hartcher describe it recently as protect us from the virus factor or something along those lines. And I think that is right. That's where Morrison stands. It was a big change in the atmospherics of the budget to have him saying that, though, because, of course, there is a lot of momentum around for this idea of getting the population vaccinated and then opening up the economy again. And there's a lot of pressure coming from business and from other sections of the community about it. But what this poll shows is the PM's probably got the bulk of voters on his side. That is, keep us locked up until such time as it's absolutely safe to go out.
The problem is, though, unlike countries where there is a lot of community transmission, there's not the urgency to get the vaccine. So there's a hesitancy, and you've got this combination of no COVID, so people aren't rushing out to get the jab, and therefore the reopening's delayed, and that sort of gilded cage continues.
It is a bit of a problem. It's a sort of a conundrum, and it's also a problem in the sense that the government's wanting to take the sort of upside, the credit for keeping us safe, when at the same time it's really been very slow in its rollout of the vaccine. I mean, the political heat's come out of that a bit now that there's some momentum going in the national vaccination program. But let's face it, they did drag their heels a bit through last year when other governments, national governments, were signing contracts with vaccine manufacturers. Australia was sort of proud of, we were told there's this portfolio approach and everything else, but there was a fair few eggs placed in the AstraZeneca basket and even in the UQ basket, which of course turned out to UQ didn't even materialise. So we've now got the Moderna deal, and there are extra Pfizer doses coming as well, and so forth. So that's fine. But I think for the government, there is a bit of a mismatch between this idea of opening up the economy and everything being right, and the pace of the vaccine program as it's rolled out.
One interesting approach to get people to take the vaccine I saw in Ohio, United States. 5 vaccinated Ohioans will win $1 million. So it's like a lottery to take the vaccine. You can enter the lottery, and the governor, Mike DeWine, says, I know people might say, DeWine, you're crazy. This $1 million drawing idea of yours is a waste of money. He says the waste is anyone who dies when there are these vaccines readily available.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess...
$5 million lottery.
Yeah, I'd be in that. Mind you, I'd miss out because I've already had the vaccine, and but I wouldn't have minded to be in that draw. Who wouldn't? I mean, because look, frankly, any sensible person, it seems to me, is going to be having the vaccine if they've got a choice, right? And if we can get the significant part of the population vaccinated, then we can get this economy open again. It's interesting, there's a bit of a debate coming now. I saw Matthew Knott, Fairfax's US correspondent, writing about this in the papers, making the point that there's a fair bit of talking down of the efficacy of the vaccines in Australia, whereas Anthony Fauci and people like that in the US are much more kind of straightforward about it. They're basically saying, when you're vaccinated, you're pretty much a dead end for the vaccine. It can't replicate, it doesn't. So they're talking up much more this idea that get vaccinated and then you don't have to wear a mask, then you can get back to sort of life after the pandemic. And I think that's a more black and white debate in other countries than it is here at the moment.
Well, they don't have the luxury to...
They've seen the downside of it in a big way.
That's right. And they know the vaccines work because they've seen it work.
Mind you, they've got Pfizer, and frankly, I didn't have Pfizer at AZ, AZ.
But that's working as well in the United Kingdom. I mean, these places where there's been a lot in the community, the vaccines are working. That's the fundamental point. Let's look at the budget now. How do you think that's been received? Obviously, I've watched politics for a long time, and I've never seen a budget bounce. People talk about a budget bounce, they just don't happen. And if you don't get a bounce off a budget like this one where the money's flowing out the door, it's a pretty good case in point. You don't get them.
Well, you and I are sports fans, right? And we know that saying that you can't win it in the first quarter, but you can lose it then. And that's true of a lot of different sports. You can certainly make a big mistake which puts you out of the game. Budgets don't tend to put you in the game, but they can keep you in the game. And I think the government did its electoral stocks no harm with this budget. Absolutely no question about that, even though there isn't that sort of bounce. If we think about the 2014 budget, the famous Abbott hockey budget, that very nearly killed them. It certainly ended their political careers. It took a little while, but it was the beginning of the end. So yeah, the bounce isn't there, but nor is the slump. And I think the budget has gone down quite well. One of the interesting findings in that, though, is that very few people can answer very clearly whether they are personally better off or not as a result of the budget. And I think that's probably because it doesn't have, the standard, like if we think back to the Howard budgets where, there were family tax benefits and other things, or we think about income tax cuts. Those are the sorts of things people can just look at a table and go, yeah, there's me and I'm better off out of this. A lot of people will be better off because of the low and middle income tax offset being extended for another year. But
that's a continuation.
It's a continuation.
You're not really better off than last year.
That's right, and it's only a one-off anyway, so they're actually going to be worse off. And I thought it was quite interesting to see Josh Frydenberg sort of trying to deal with that question over the weekend. Once those stage 3 tax cuts come in, are you better off or worse off as a middle income earner who doesn't benefit from that stage 3 tax cut? That's a question the government's going to have to, I think, do some more explaining on over time.
The Labor response, though, also has to tread carefully because of the way that their tax policies were received at the last election.
Yeah, they do.
I know it's a different scenario, but still that aspirational voter, that sort of cohort, Labor, they know they have to tread carefully on that front.
Yeah, it's a minefield really for Labor because when you think about it, you think of the stage 3 tax cuts, right? I mean, there's a critique to be made that this is about the top end and we've got growing inequality in Australia, the rich getting richer and so forth. But what's Labor going to do? Is Labor going to propose to rescind those stage 3 tax cuts, which it actually did vote for, I think, in the Parliament? Is it going to vote to roll them back? Because if it does, it's taking a tax increase to the next election. And that goes to your question, really. There were a number of ways in which that taxes were going to be increased last time when we think about changes to negative gearing and, the other one, which slips my mind, capital gains and the tax dividend changes as well. So
franking credits.
Yeah, franking credits. That's the arcane term I was looking for.
Well, exactly. And I wonder whether they'll redo the stage 3 to just heavily favour the low to middle. But it's, as you say, it's fraught, the whole thing for Labor.
We didn't get much of a clue really as to where Labor's going to go on that. And there's some criticism about the way Anthony Albanese's speech was because of the lack of detail. But then, wiser heads will go, well, do you need to release all the detail now or do you wait till a more strategically advantageous time?